Welcome to our meeting today, our program. We have Nick Principe here, and we look very much forward to what he has to share with us today. Jai Baba, Nick.
Jai Baba. Thank you, Diane. So I'm gonna really, the best way to start, I think, is to give you a little bit of a genesis about why this talk is even happening. Pardon me. I presume you're all familiar with Angela Chen. Uh, she is not only been a friend for years, she is also now treating me with acupuncture because of old injuries. And during the course of this treatment, in a professional setting, it's been very appropriate to talk about suffering because she, of course, needs to know what the problems are, what hurts, what are the causes, things like that. Um, so it got to the point that over a number of visits, she said, "You know, you've got such an interesting approach to handling suffering. How about doing a talk on suffering?" I said, "Sure, I'm sign me up. I'm an expert on how to suffer." And I don't mean that in a, oh, woe is me kind of attitude. It's just something that'll become clear. It's something that's been with me my whole life. But I'm going to preface all this, I hope, now. And as I say, none of this is a, oh, woe is me, because I absolutely do not feel that way. I love my life. With all the suffering, I wouldn't trade the suffering for anything because Baba has responded as I was told he would. So here's a few things to lay background for it. I found out about Baba in the late 60s. I've been in touch with the mandali. I've exchanged letters with Erich way back in the early 70s. My first trip to India was in the 70s. I used to spend a lot of time walking with Erich. He told me one time, quoted Baba, he said, "The only thing that is under your control is your attitude." That is the extent of our free will. There is no free will except our attitude. Now, when he told me that, I was in my 30s, and I didn't even think to question it, partially because I think I didn't believe it. But nevertheless, that's what he said. On that same trip, uh, I had stayed, pardon me, this was first trip to India. I had stayed at the center for a couple of weeks before going off to India and watched a lot of films about Baba, which, and I had grown up I was living in Florida. There were no films about Baba, there were no books available. I think there were 5 books that I knew that were available in America at that time, or at least available to me. I had been to the center a couple of times. But anyway, watching these films about Baba, and in the films, of course, Marshall Hay, those who knew him, he would, kind of moderate the film and explain what was going on. And at one point, Baba's giving darshan, people are coming up for to touch Baba's feet. Baba would give them maybe a candy or some grapes or a banana. And Marshall explained that was prasad. It was a gift from the hand of the master to the man. So off I go to India, and I come out of the samadhi the first time, and there's Mansari, the little lady who had been with Baba for, I don't know, lifetimes. And she hands me these 2 little orange candies. And I said, "What's this?" And she said, "It's prasad." And my first reaction was to actually be offended. because I thought these are not from the master's hand. These are from this little old lady. Why is she calling this prasad? So some time later, days later, Erich would walk every morning up and down the road. So I would walk with him when I was there, and he was in the habit of asking me, "What's troubling you?" And I was impertinent in those days. I would ask the mandali anything. There was nothing I was shy about asking. And I told him, I said, Erich, this is what happened at the Samadhi, and I'm offended by it. And he said, why? I said, well, it's not from Baba's hands. It's from this little lady, and she's calling it prasad. And Erich put his arm on my shoulder and looked at me, and he said, brother, the very air you breathe is prasad if you take it that way. As I repeat those words now, I have chill bumps coming up on my arms because that tied in with his previous comment about attitude. And I think when we think about suffering, it's very difficult to think of that as prasad. But my experience is that it is. I'm going to quote something from Upasni. View suffering as long lost friends and welcome it. Because as Baba has told us, pardon me, suffering is the mechanism by which we draw closer to God. If born with patience and fortitude, eventually you get inner strength, which makes suffering a pleasure and eventually leads one to God. Subsequent walk with Erich. I asked him again, just an impertinent. I'm glad I did. The mandali never, ever refused to answer a question of mine, regardless how ridiculous it was. But I asked Erich, I'm almost embarrassed to say this. I asked him why he wasn't happy. I thought his Erich has been with Baba his whole life. He should be walking around on a cloud. And Erich, while we were walking, he stopped, he looked at me, he said, what do you mean? I said, Erich, I never see you smile. And you know, as I've been looking over these years of videos, Erich was rarely seen with a smile on his face. Not like Mani, who was always at smiling, greeting people, though Mani could be stern. But Erich was pretty solid. And he said, brother, he said, happiness is not a smile. Happiness is what you feel inside. And then he said to me, the day will come when you will welcome suffering. He said, don't invite it, but when it comes, you will welcome it. And that's one of the ways I have found out the wisdom of that. And here's the reason. And I never thought to ask when they would make these statements to me. I never thought to ask why. And it was because I almost inwardly knew I would have to have the experience. So now I'm going to fast forward a couple of years. There was a caretaker at the center given the job by Baba, Fred Winterfeld, for those who knew him and met Baba in the 50s. He and his wife, Ella, Baba called them Fred Ella, they were the gatekeepers at the center. I got to spend a lot of time with them. And Fred said to me one time, he said, the spiritual journey is from here to here. I didn't think to ask him what he meant. What I have come to think it means, and this is a work in progress, is that when we first read about Baba, we hear from Baba, he gives us some directive, we may even make some kind of attempt at, trying to follow some of this. It's all happening up here. It occasionally will come down to the heart quickly. But I think sometimes it takes a long time. It might take lifetimes for all that information to percolate down. That's why I think when Baba said, just tell somebody my name, it's the best gift you can give to somebody is to mention my name to somebody. They may not realize the importance of hearing that in this birth. It may take many births. So to me, that's what's been happening. All this kind of information that I gathered up here is coming down here. Now, how that pertains to suffering, I was going down, suffering, of course, can be physical, could be mental, could be a combination of the two. It might be spiritual suffering, someone that longs so much to be, they say that Duncan died of a broken heart because he missed Baba so much. That to me is got to be a tremendous suffering that you don't want to live because you're so in love with a beloved, you want to be with him. So in this episode, I can tell you exactly, it's 10 o'clock, a few minutes before 10 in the morning, I was driving to work. I was going through an incredible amount of mental and emotional suffering. And like all of us, I call out to Baba. I'm trying to repeat Baba's name. But I realized, not right at that moment, but shortly after, I realized all that repetition of his name was here. All that memory of his name was here, wasn't here. And I was stopped at a traffic light, crying. That's how bad this suffering was, emotional suffering was. And I called out to Baba, and the voice that I heard was not my own voice. It was a voice, it was my voice, but it was a voice that welled up from someplace deep in my being. And the minute that cry out to Baba came out, Baba was sitting in the passenger seat with me. And I realized that how inadequate my repetition of his name was, how mechanical it was. It was only when it became heartfelt And the suffering had to be intense. And I never, before or after, had the emotional suffering that I had right at that time. And that he was with me pretty much nonstop for about almost 2 weeks. As the suffering subsided, I found myself again repeating his name mechanically. I could not, on my own, without some prompting, I could not tap into that deep place again. And at that moment, Derich's words rang true to me. And he said, the day will come when you will welcome suffering. And I realized that's why. Because at that moment, when the suffering is really intense, that's when we really turn to Baba. And since then, that was in the 70s, that he told me that. Since then, my body has suffered tremendously, but now I welcome it because I do see it as a means to an end, because my attitude has changed towards it. Now, just to give a little background on the physical side, and this is what dear darling Dr. Angela has been dealing with. I was in military service when I was 20 years old. I was injured on a training mission. I was never diagnosed because of those injuries. Long story short, I went out into civilian life, but continued to suffer from the injuries. But I didn't connect the dots. I didn't associate my injuries, or the pain, I should say, or discomfort with an injury, because they hadn't been diagnosed. It really was like what I dealt with for 50 years. Well, it would almost be, I think, as if one had some disease growing in the body that had a long gestation period, that you weren't aware that you had this problem, but yet you periodically would have symptoms, whether it was an ache or a pain or sporadic bleeding or whatever it may be. It was only about 10 years ago. That's when I retired and moved to Myrtle Beach. Pardon me. That the government finally admitted that it was their responsibility. And it was at that point that they made the appropriate diagnoses. And it's a long litany of lists. There's no reason to go into all the details, but that's what I'm dealing with. But it's been a rather fascinating journey, because over a period of years, I'm going to say from I'm now 80, 81. It's only about 10, 12 years ago that the VA finally acknowledged their responsibility. So I went more than 50 years with them saying I was just imagining things and making things up, really accusing me of being a fraud. And what happened, it devastated my personal life. Couldn't keep a relationship together. Was fortunate I was self-employed because I couldn't work for anybody. I would have been fired within a short period of time. It was, but what happened during that entire period of time, Baba, well, let's put it this way. Bao used to stay with me when he would come to the States. And we were very, very close. He said to me, and I did not know at the time, I still hadn't connected the dots, but I knew I had problems. I knew I had mental problems. I knew I had psychological problems. I knew I had physical problems. He said, brother, by the way, for those who don't know, that's what Bao means. Baba gave Bao that name, Bao, which means brother. To me, he was the epitome of a true brother. He said, brother, he said, everybody has different spiritual disease. Baba gives each of us different medicine. So I realized that what was happening in my life, like for instance, him enabling me to be self-employed, I didn't have to work for anybody because I didn't have a personality that dealt with working for people. I couldn't take direction. I couldn't take orders. I had trust issues. It was almost like being a victim of abuse. Um, you know, because of this 50-year battle with the government. And again, by Baba's grace, now they take very good care of me. They take care of my medical stuff. I get a compensation. My daughter said to me, Daddy, it's too bad they didn't give you this, acknowledge it when it happened, when you were 20 years old. Your life would have been different. I said, yes, that's true. However, if they would have started taking care of me at that time, I would have spent all that money on sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And instead, now what I spend it on is taking care of myself, taking care of my health, trying to live a decent life, an honorable life. So Baba, he does give us each what we need and not what we want. So money, the last time I saw money, pardon me, the last time I saw money in India, uh, she had already, I believe, had been diagnosed. She had some with something with her brain. I don't remember. She was riding a four-wheel mobility scooter, I think, and she was coming from Baba's house, Mayor's house, to over near where the blue bus was, and she's on this scooter, and she's got her something wrapped around her head. I don't know if she had lost her hair or what. She had a scarf, and she had her tongue clenched between her teeth, like riding the scooter. And I thought to myself, it's the one time I really wish that I was an artist, because I would have loved to have captured that look. Because what I realized is Monty was having fun. Whatever was going on with her illness, whatever it was, she was having fun. She was making the best out of the situation. And that, I think, is it ties into, what Baba said about your attitude. I think all the mandali, they had wonderful attitudes. There wasn't one of them, in my experience, that was a whiner or a complainer. And for those, in those days, there were no books. The available, the one, as I said, there were, I think, five. The discourses, God Speaks, Jean Adriel's book, Purdam's book. That was probably about it. And after you read those, what do you do? So what we did is those of us who had the opportunity would talk to the mandali, and they kind of would. To me, they were like aunties and uncles. I was in my mid-30s, I guess, and first going there, and they were probably in their 50s and 60s, sort of in the prime of life. And they really kind of helped, I would say, clarify, sort of things to give us a proper view. Would ask him, what does Baba mean by this? What does he mean by that? How do you reconcile something that appears to be, two different messages? Simple, for instance, in prayer of repentance, we're asking Baba for forgiveness for telling lies, and we're asking for forgiveness for hurting someone's feelings. How do you reconcile those two? I was in a quandary over it. So one of my trips to India, I got Erich, and I explained to him, I said, here, this is, and he explained just so simply and so beautifully. He said, brother, you only, to make somebody happy, you never compromise your own value. It's a simple line in the sand, but on my own, I couldn't come up with it. We have a tendency, or at least I should speak for myself, the tendency is to be kind of absolute. It's either this way or that way. So, yeah, you make others happy, but you don't compromise your own. Might be something simple. Somebody says, it would make me happy if you drink some whiskey with me. And you go, no, I'd rather not. Yeah, it's not that it's, there's no right or wrong with it. It's just you don't have to do it. So establishing those kind of lines is pretty. Quote from Baba. By the way, this part of the reason why this has also been so timely. I'm rereading the Bao's 14-volume biography. I'm on volume 12. That's in the 50s. Baba's dealing with the highest of the high. One of the lines from there, which I'm sure everybody is familiar with, if not, go back and read it. He said, I am not the one to take suffering from you. I'm the one to give you more suffering. He promises us that, and then we're surprised when we have suffering. And sometimes we think, why we shouldn't. When I mentioned about the those in close contact with Bob and their lack of complaining. Fred Winterfeld, going back again, he at the end of his life he had pancreatic cancer. Very painful. His abdomen was just completely swollen. My wife was a nurse. I was in nursing school. We were living in Myrtle Beach. Elizabeth gave us a key to the center and told Ella, Fred's wife, that when Fred was in pain, the worst pain, which was usually in the middle of the night, to call us. We would drive to the center. We'd let ourselves in. My then wife, Beth, would administer an injection of Demerol to Fred. And then she'd go out in the kitchen and have a cup of tea with Ella because Ella was pretty distraught and upset. And I would sit with Fred. And he's laying, they used twin beds. He's laying in one bed, and I'm sitting on Ella's bed. And he's just holding his abdomen, rolling from side to side, just really moaning. And I thought to myself, oh, Baba, I said, why is this necessary? I said, this man loves you so much. He's been with you. Is that really, I don't understand why that suffering is there. And Fred at that point, stopped moaning. He looked directly at me. He was Austrian. He said, ah, Nick, you like the song I'm singing? Yeah. And then he went back to the moaning and the groaning. And what I realized then, that what was happening to his body was not what was happening to his spirit. In the States, 100 years ago, I was a registered nurse, worked in the emergency room here in Myrtle Beach. And what I saw then is that for many Westerners, we could not separate our physical from our mental or spiritual side, our spirit. If somebody had a headache, if they were in pain, they became incapacitated. They were just very oftentimes just not, they couldn't do anything. All they wanted was relief. I was doing volunteer work in India at Goer's clinic, and people would come in with these most devastating injuries. And I was doing whatever assistance I could, and she had an interpreter with me so that I could send me off to go interview people and triage. And I remember this one fellow who had been gored in the testicles by a buffalo. He was completely saturated in blood. However, he walked, I presume, to the clinic, clutching his dhoti, everything wrapped up around him with his blood. And in typical Western fashion, I asked inane questions like, how are you doing? And he looked at me and said, in his language, he said, oh, I'm fine, sir. I said, you fine? I said, you're bleeding. You look like you get civilian. Oh, yes, sir. This hurts terribly, but I'm fine. The difference between the body and the spirit, that I think those in the East have a tendency to think of more than. And I think that's a way of dealing with suffering also. We have to deal with suffering as if the body is not ours. It's aloof from us. It's not connected with the spirit. However one does that, I don't have a magical formula for it. All that I'm trying to pass on is these are all the kind of little tricks, you might say, that I've used to enable myself to deal with the suffering that has gotten much more severe as time has gone by. As the suffering has gotten more severe, I find I handle it a lot better. It's because I know, again, as Baba himself had said, to remove a thorn, sometimes you have to use a sharper instrument, a scalpel in the hands of a practitioner to remove a thorn. So you need greater suffering in order to relieve suffering. And that, I think, is tied into it. Another aspect of this, which has been rather embarrassing, but it honesty requires that I say something about it. I am a born critic. I love criticizing other people because it makes me feel better about myself. It's only recently that I realize how stupid it is and what a waste of time it is, which of course Bob also cautioned about. He said exactly, don't waste your precious breath criticizing other people because we don't know. I mean, I am considered severely handicapped. I don't look handicapped. I have all my limbs. I can move. I can go to the bathroom by myself. But I am severely handicapped. But people don't know that. So, believe me, I've been abused, verbally abused, because, I just don't, it'd be easier if I lost a limb. Doesn't go, doesn't have a foot or a leg. But the fact that you can have intense pain or suffering, people don't see that unless you're weeping and crying. I'm not. So I've gone on 45 minutes now, and I don't know if anybody's got any comments or questions, but I do want to leave you with a joke. My father, who suffered tremendously, never, ever complained. And I find the dichotomy with him and my mother. My father, who was had ruptured appendix when my mother was pregnant with me, the doctors told her that he would not live through the night. My father lived to be 77 years old. He lived every day in gratitude. My mother, who had no problems, complained at every opportunity. And it was just really funny watching this dichotomy between them. But my father, he would periodically come up with one of these jokes. And I find it so interesting now. This joke I'm about to tell you is probably, he must have told me this when I was about 15. And we were listening to somebody there was a neighbor who was going on and really complaining about something, whatever it was, I don't know, but it was for the neighborhood to hear. My father, when we came back inside, my father said, I think that fellow needs an optorectomy. And I said, an optorectomy? Daddy, what's that? I never heard of it. He said, well, he said, that's where the surgeon severs the nerve that leads from the eye to the ass to eliminate your shitty outlook on life. And I remember that because that's, I think all of us at one point or another need a little optorectomy treatment. You know, we have to, well, because we all pass through. I hope I'm not generalizing too much, but I think all of us pass through this kind of feeling that that things are pretty shitty. And so we just need maybe find a surgeon who's Baba will be that surgeon to treat us for that. So I think I've quote from Baba, page 4018 on the 12. God loves most those who suffer most. And of course, in the discourses, very early on, I think it's probably volume 1, Baba actually states that most suffering is self-inflicted. So understanding suffering, if it is self-inflicted suffering, whether it's caused by lust or hate or jealousy, whatever it is, I think once we understand it, it gives us an opportunity to perhaps avoid those same mistakes in the future. So I'm pretty close to time here. It's 10 of 12. I don't know if anybody's got comments. Ron, it's nice to see you. It's been a very long time. I believe we met in India many, many years ago.
Did you say Ron?
Yeah.
Oh,
Isn't
okay.
it?
I
Isn't
don't
it?
remember that, Nick. But
Yeah.
I've heard I don't know that we've ever met, but I've heard your name many, many times over the years. And I'm so happy to have been able to listen to your stories. It's very, very moving, very well told. I appreciate it.
Are you a physician?
No,
Not a medical person?
I I'm interested in medical. I'm very interested in it. I try to study it, but not as my profession.
Uh-huh. Well, nice. Where do you live, sir?
I live near Yosemite National Park in California, uh,
Oh, wonderful.
near the Maharana Baba Center
Yeah.
in Mariposa. Yeah, I've been living in the woods for the last 6 years. Uh, and before that, I lived in the suburbs for 70 years.
Uh-huh.
Quite a difference, quite a change.
Yeah.
I would like to contribute something to the subject,
Yeah.
which is having set various messages of Baba's and sayings to songs. I have two little songs that are on the theme of suffering. These are Baba's words. I'd like to I'd like to try them and see if they fit in with the theme. So if you don't mind, I'll sing
Not
one.
at all. Go ahead.
have to do something here before I play this. Okay. Suffering comes through ignorance or attachment to illusions. Most people play with illusions like children play with toys. If you get caught up in the ephemeral things of this world and cling to illusory values, suffering is inevitable. It is not easy for little children to give up their toys, or they become the victims of a habit which they cannot undo. In the same way, through millions of lives you have got into the habit of playing with illusions. It is difficult for you to get disentangled from them. Suffering comes through ignorance or attachment to illusions. Most people play with, yes, most people play with, most people play with illusions like children play with toys.
Thank you. Thank you, Ron.
Thank you.
This has just been lovely, Nick. I'm so happy that you've come to be with us today. I wanted to say that I think I mentioned to you earlier that I had watched one of your recent videos, and you had begun that video by saying that Baba has been nothing but kind to you. And I'm listening to you today, and I think what you've done today has illustrated that. It's just been lovely.
Yeah, thank you. He, I couldn't imagine if anybody would have told me um, years ago how my life would be now. Um, Baba had told uh, Starosh in particular in Manzilamim, but he directed it to the men, to Adi and others. He said, I will give you a life that even kings will envy. And that's how I feel about my life now. Um, I see professional people, wealthy people. My life is completely fine, but it's based on him giving us what we need and not what we want.
Mm.
And when the attitude changes and we appreciate what he's given us, then that all of a sudden uh, everything glows. It's got a light. It's different. Why he could live on rice and dal. And the mandali, I remember Bal used to say, we lived on rice and dal, and then for a treat we would have dal and rice. And they survived and thrived on something so simple. So I thank you for allowing me to be here.
Well, thank you also. I just wanted to say one other thing, and that is that one time when I was in India, I was very interested to see Prasad getting charged on the marble. And I think it was Nanakir who had a little bag of Prasad. He leaned over, you've probably seen it. He laid the Prasad on the marble. He swung his arm behind his back, and then he brought his arm forward and he took the Prasad off. So all that Prasad always comes from Baba.
Yeah, and I do try to remind myself every day, as Eric said, even the very air you breathe is prasad if you take it that way.
Mhm.
Then all of a sudden you don't run from anything, even suffering. Bao asked me one time, we were having dinner out with some other people, and Bao asked me rather spontaneously to say a prayer before the meal. And I didn't have anything, and this is what came out spontaneously. Thank you, Baba, for all your gifts, whether perceived as pain or pleasure, and all your blessings, whether known or unknown. For in your name is rest, solace, and peace everlasting. Amen. Bao told me afterwards, he said that was inspired. I hadn't thought about it, I hadn't rehearsed it, I didn't, the words just came out. And that's, I think,
Not going out there, so it's not an issue.
pardon? Sorry, he's constantly giving us things. All right. You all.
We have 3 hands up. Do you have time for a few more questions?
Sure, absolutely. I have plenty of time.
Thank you. Well, we have Diane and Terry here.
Yeah.
Hi there.
Hi again.
Hi again. So we live in Los Angeles,
Yes.
and it's not news to anybody, the suffering that has been going on here. Enough to have, depending on what day of the week it is, us to literally say, why, Baba? And you said something early on that I have noticed we know lots and lots and lots of people who have lost everything materialistically in their homes. And you talked about that suffering is going to be given to all of us, but it's our attitude
Yeah. Yeah.
that is our only free will. Did I
Yes.
get that right?
You did.
I have noticed that when I talk with people, and I've been very cognizant to be sensitive to only being a listener because I cannot pretend to even imagine what it's like, even though we're just a couple miles from the devastation. And Terry lost the medical building that she worked in for 40 years, and so much is lost. But that attitude, like one friend literally who's 68 years old said, I always, the only argument I had with my husband was how he organized the garage. That's not an argument anymore. And the detachment that she had and understanding that she now has a blank slate that she wouldn't have chosen, but it's what was chosen for her, is so different than the people who are, why me? And
Blaming.
a lot of blame here in town and a lot of just so feeling lost.
Yeah. Well, I think one of our responsibilities as Baba lovers is to remind each other um, about what Baba may have said about a particular circumstance. Because we all forget. until we're in the situation ourselves. I would suggest that you read, you can online if you don't have the printed volumes, the Baba's time in Amipur in the 50s. That's when he gave his comment about the highest of the high. He talked about 3/4 of the world being destroyed. We forget that. We forget that he's told us it's going to happen. We don't want it to happen to us. We don't want it to happen to our close ones. We don't want it to happen to our neighbors. It should be over there. And as Americans, we've been very spoiled because we don't have wars and conflicts on our soil. Not like Syria and places like that in the Middle East, where those people live. It's we most of us don't even think about it. I don't. It's not me. But that's okay. I think it's okay because that's not my responsibility. Is to remember Baba. My responsibility is not to think about all the evils in the world. My responsibility is to recognize them and avoid them. And I can't correct it. And there's another thing that's very important. Quick little story. Baba was in northern India, this is many, many years ago, and he was touring a children's hospital. And one of the men who was with him was so emotionally disturbed by seeing these children who were crippled and all sorts, couldn't get out of bed, and he actually asked Baba, couldn't he take some of that suffering from these kids? The story is that at that moment, Baba reached back, grabbed his own back, started grimacing, started perspiring, collapsed on the ground, writhing in pain, holding his back. The mandali did the best they could to revive Baba, to get him. After a few minutes. Baba came back to his usual self, and they asked him what happened. And Baba pointed to that fellow and said, because you are criticizing me, don't you think I ought to know what's going on here? He said, your words to me were like stabbing me in the back because you're my lover. So it's a very difficult thing for us to accept what's going on in the world. If it's our responsibility, get out and do something about it. I worked as an emergency room nurse. I worked in neurosurgical ICU. That was my job at that time. It's not my job now. Believe me, you don't want me to administer medication to you now. I probably, if I aimed for your arm, I'd hit your sofa. So, it's part of, if we accept Baba for who he says he is, we have to trust him. And this pain and suffering, I think if we don't learn to deal with it, we're all going to have to endure it in one way or another, whether it's to ourselves or to our closer ones.
I was in conversation with a beloved Baba person about pain and suffering. And he said, and I'm going to paraphrase his words, we're all going to suffer. It doesn't always have to go to pain. Our attachment to pain can be disconnected. And he used the example of the moths who were cold, had blisters, who were hungry, all that, but they were in bliss. They suffered, but they didn't feel it as painful.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the story I told about Fred Winterfeld.
Yes,
You know, his spirit was not experiencing what his body was going through. And what we're seeing is the body. You know, that's why with, you know, all these folks, we really don't know. As tragic as everything is, there are probably more than a few people who are relieved. Whether they were underwater with debt, whether they now see themselves as having a clean slate, you can start over. You know, there are, we have a tendency to be more morbid and cynical as we get older. We kind of focus on those, you know, sort of the worst things rather than focus on the best things. And really, as I say, I mean, my own experience, nothing like the California thing, but I had a beautiful home on acreage in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. The mandali had visited with me and stayed with me for years. Many of them were there, Katie Nehru was there, the twins, John and Dolly Dastur. Bao stayed with me 8 or 9 times. It was like a Baba hotel in and out. And all of a sudden I lost it. I end up in a little apartment in Myrtle Beach. But, it would be ridiculous of me because what he's given me is completely manageable. And there was no way I could manage that as at my age now. And since I've been here, I've been able to travel. That's how I get to meet Valeria and spend time with her in Italy. I mean, I've been back and forth to Italy every year for the last 10 years. And if I had that house, I couldn't do it. So Baba, it was like a millstone around my neck. But I didn't see it that way. I saw it as this beautiful possession. Then it was just, he said, no, it's yours temporarily. Now you're finished with it. So, I mean, that's what life is, isn't it? I mean, even our relationships with each other, it's temporary. You know, we're born naked and alone, and that's how we go out.
We still have hands. Oh, go ahead, Terry.
Go ahead.
Unmute, please.
We go out alone, but with Bubba. So
Yeah.
I don't feel alone.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We have some more hands up. Should we move on to Anthony?
Hey, Jay, Bob, and Nick, this has been awesome. This is so inspirational, and I'm glad we're going to have this video to refer back to, when we need it. It's such a gift. My question, I'm wondering if you had any input on this. So when I have a certain suffering going on, I don't know, I really enjoy Darwin's approach to working with yourself and, trying to transform your thoughts, your outlook, just everything he talks about in effort and grace. So I feel like when I'm going through a suffering, like, I might be down in the dumps about it and I can work with it and raise my attitude up a little bit, learn to deal with it, learn to be patient with it. But it can be hard to get to that place where there's genuine thankfulness, enjoying it, maybe even being cheerful. Um, do you feel like with some things that it's really hard to get to that place of actually being cheerful and I don't know, to where it's like, hey, the best I can do in this situation is to accept it, to be at peace with it, but I don't know if I'm quite gonna get cheerful, over this thing. So do you kind of give yourself that room to be like, hey, I've raised up my attitude quite a bit. I'm not going to put the pressure on myself to actually be happy and cheerful about this thing, but I can be at peace with it. I don't know if that makes sense at all.
It does. I don't expect to be cheerful about any suffering because
Yeah, can
uh,
Jackson, just two words. Nick, recently, Anthony shared with us in a after Artie with Jeff Overton, a story I had no idea of. I don't know Anthony and his wife very well. It's a lovely, gorgeous, lovely, sweet wife, I know. But Anthony's been going through a, a noteworthy suffering, I tell you, shocking. And you might like to hear it if Anthony, if you want the time, take the time, and if Anthony will concede to, feels comfortable sharing it again. It's not too long, I think. Anthony, Nick, it regard his, he, Anthony,
where is
highly trained nurse. Yeah,
where is Anthony?
go ahead.
It's up to you, Nick. I don't know if you want me to share anything real quick or, yeah, if you felt, I know you were about to answer, like how, yeah, I appreciate what you said that you don't expect to really be cheerful about any type of stuff.
Is whether or not you want to tell me about what you're going through, that's fine. Either way is fine. But I, what I always try to do, number one, is what did Baba say about this? Did I just lose you, Anthony?
Oh no, we're still here. It was just a
Oh,
little
okay.
static.
Okay. What did Baba say about this? And I try and find something if I can. Or what about the mandali? Okay, so here's what I would say about this. My anytime, look, there are some mornings, for instance, I'll give you a direct. I have a broken ankle that was completely untreated when it happened in the military. So I have this ankle that is like a balloon. They can't fix it now because it's 50 years later. There are some mornings I wake up, when I try to get out of bed, I have tears in my eyes. I have to have, I keep a walker, which is right here by me because I can't get to the bathroom. That's how severe this is. My comment to myself at that time, Baba, what is it you want me to learn from this? That's what I say to myself, not the any relief that comes is going to come at his pleasure. It's going to come at his time, not at my time. So whatever suffering one has, for me, that's or any experience. It's not just suffering, but Baba had said, whatever you're going through, just what is it? Just ask me, what do you want me to learn from this? It could be an argument. I'll give you a simple, for instance. Years ago, years and years ago, I was having trouble with a guy at the center. I was a pretty young, tough guy. And there was this one guy, I knew that if he pestered me anymore, I was just going to punch him in the nose. And I knew if I did that, I was going to get thrown off the center. I'd get banned for a while. So I went to talk to Kitty. And I explained to Kitty what was going on. And, I didn't know how to deal with it. And she just finally looked at me and she said, Nick, Baba said we have to love each other. He did not say we have to like each other. This was just the simplest explanation I could have ever received. So I don't have to like what's going on. I don't embrace, I don't look, let's just say I don't look for suffering. It's going to find you. One way or the other, suffering is going to find you. The other thing is, what each of us have different tolerance. Because, and I saw this with physical health, but I think the same thing happens with mental health. If your suffering is mental, some people, I think I've sort of developed a rather stoicism about suffering, but that's available for everybody. There are some people, again, when I worked in the emergency room, there were some people who would have a headache and they were completely immobile, they were crippled. Other people, I played sports, you would hear tales of football players who had fractured an arm and they're still playing because their adrenaline is so high they don't even feel the pain. So, it's we shouldn't measure. Don't try and measure pain or discomfort. It's and Baba will relieve it in his time. That's what I ask him. I think, okay, Baba, do you want me to sometimes when the pain is like that in the morning, I just get back in bed. I have to get off the ankle. I say, okay, Bob, does that mean I'm supposed to stay in bed for half the day? Then 10 minutes later, I might get, and it's gone. And that's not an unusual occurrence. That's kind of, so, Erich used to tell me, he said, whatever you're doing, involve Baba in it. Involve Baba in what you're doing. If you go fixing a sandwich, just ask Baba, think about, would Baba like this? Baba, how would you like tuna fish sandwich, Baba? Well, yeah, but maybe I won't put any celery in it because Baba didn't have teeth. He couldn't chew celery. So I'd have to make it kind of soft. Baba says egg salad. Would you like an egg salad sandwich? I do that all the time. I don't have a cup of coffee in the morning without asking Baba to join me. Make him your constant companion. If he is your constant companion, then you share the suffering. He's there to feed you ice cream while you're suffering.
It's beautiful, Nick. It's yeah, just real quick. I know we got some other questions here. Yeah, it's like it takes what you're saying takes the pressure off to be cheerful and like it and all that, but you can have him with you and stay open to the experience and be willing to learn from it. And I feel like that's pretty realistic to get there. Yeah, it's just what Ralph was saying. I'm actually a registered nurse too, and I was let go from a wonderful 15-year career for an incident that I never did, but I was accused of it, and there's been attorney involvement, and we're going on almost 2.5 years of this stuff, and it's just been insane. But it's as terrible as it's been. I've stayed open and other amazing things are unfolding. And, I don't think I could have ever been cheerful about anything, but I'm pretty open to having Baba there with me and learning from it and, seeing where the journey goes. And I think that's made it to where, I haven't turned bitter from it. I'm open and seeing where the journey goes. And it's actually been kind of fun at times.
See, I'm thrilled to hear this. Dr. Gower told me to go to nursing school. That's how I ended up in nursing school. I was 35 when I went to nursing school. And long story short, I only worked clinical for a couple of years. But I'll tell you what, my nursing education has helped me survive to be an old man because I can communicate with doctors. I know I've checked myself out of emergency rooms twice because of misdiagnoses or improper diagnoses in the emergency room. Went to another facility. So your nursing education, it'll be what Baba wants it to be. you know. Just a quick little, just to tell you how, just to put this into perspective. When Dr. Goer told me to go to nursing school, and I'm telling you something that very few people know about, it's not that it's secret, it's just there's never been an opportunity to say anything about it. She said, you go to nursing school. I had no idea. This was spontaneous. She said, go to nursing school, and then you come back and you work at the clinic here. And then she told me, what's his name? This is a doctor. It's a Marwan Mystery and was living in New Jersey. She said, go interview with him. This was I was in my 30s. He was in his 30s, but his family grew up with Baba. So I make an arrangement. I go see him. I haven't gone to nursing school yet. Goer told me, she said, go see him and interview for the job. So I call him, I make an appointment, I go to his house, and I tell him what happened. I said, he said, you're not a nurse and you're interviewing for a job. I said, yeah, I have no idea why she did this. I said, all I'm doing is just following instructions. So, and he says to me, well, I don't know about you interviewing. He said, but I can tell you, I will never go back to India. I will never work at the clinic. And we have a couple of laughs over it. We might have had a cup of tea, and off I go. But what I'm thinking now, I wasn't thinking this 35 years ago when this happened. I'm thinking now, who knows what's going to happen next birth? Whether he's going to be a physician there and I'll be a nurse there. Who knows? We don't know about whatever plans Baba has for us for the future. You know, and I think your nursing education, that's your value, is because Baba liked nurses. So, you know, I think it's absolutely wonderful, and yeah, fulfill your worldly responsibilities, go through whatever you need to go through. I have fought the VA for 50 years. I was turned down by attorneys who wouldn't take my case. They said, you'll never win it. I won it on my own because of my nursing education. I knew what to look for. I knew the evidence they needed.
Amazing. Thank you so much. It's been great.
Yeah, good luck,
If
brother.
you had Baba incorporated into your nursing skills.
Yeah.
I wanted to be a nurse, and I know I have relatives and people close to me who become nurses. Phyllis Ott tried to become a nurse. She flunked, Nick.
Yeah.
It's no small feat to become a registered nurse. It's difficult. I admire you guys, you people who pursue that career. Very good.
Thank you all. We now have Ron. Yes, Ron.
Am I, shall I? Okay.
Okay.
So what I wanted to say is how much I uh, got from that very first quote that originated from Baba, probably, but also from Erich about that the only free will we have is that which uh, demands our, well, that will affect our attitude. And the reason it's so important to me, it's a confirmation for something that I have been doing for now about 25 years. I've been writing my own thoughts and philosophies, and most of that time was sending letters to the editor, which I did for 20 something years. And one of the main things that I would always include, not always, but what I often would include, this is for a long time, was that if we want to solve problems for, and this is humanity, not necessarily for me, but humanity, if they're going to solve some of the problems, things will have to change. And I used to always say that the changes will be systemic and attitudinal. And I didn't even know, I don't think I ever even heard that word attitudinal, but I started using it, and I continue to use it because, and this quote is so confirming that it's not just for an individual, but it's for humanity as a whole. The more we collectively change our attitudes, I think we're on the right path to solving problems. And Baba said that love will solve, and God solves all the problems. So I appreciated hearing that. That was so important.
Well, here's the genesis of that. When Bao would stay with me, he always had some marvelous stories. And so somebody asked him one time about free will. This is the first time that came to my attention, about this issue of free will. And Bao said, no, we don't have free will. Erich used to say, by the way, the only free will you have is when you decide to become his slave. That's the only free will you have. But Bao said, no free will. And this fellow at my house, dozens of people there, he said, well, what do you mean we have no free will? I can get up, I can go. I don't have to sit here and listen to you. I can. And Bao said, no, you have limited free will, but you don't have what you think is free will. And he said, this fellow said, can you explain it to me? And this is the story that Bao told. He said, in the time of Buddha, he said the Buddha was sitting with his mandali, his disciples, and the topic was free will. And he said, there is no such thing as free will. And one of his disciples said, Buddha, how can you say that? Because I feel like I can do what I want to do with sitting. I can stand up if I want to. I can move around. And the Buddha said, no, I'm telling you, you have limited. What you call free will is just tiny limited. He said, can you explain it to me? And Buddha said, yes, I will. He said, please stand up. So the fellow stood up, and the Buddha said, now extend one arm, which he did. He said, now wave it. And he's waving the arm. He's now raised the other arm, wave it. And he did, he's got both arms, he's waving. The Buddha said, now raise one leg and wave it. And the fellow did. And then the Buddha stops and he goes on to the talking about something else. And this disciple says, Buddha, why you're having me do exercises? I'm asking you to explain about free will. You're having me do exercises. And the Buddha says, you don't understand what I'm showing you. He said, no, I don't understand. What is there to understand? The Buddha said, now raise your other leg. And of course, the fellow couldn't. And Buddha said, that leg is under the divine will. You can move two arms and one leg, that's your free will. You think you've got lots of freedom, but the other leg is anchored on the ground because that you can jump, but you can't raise it because you are under divine will, call it gravity, but that's divine will. So that's the difference. We have that much free will.
Thank you. Thank you, Nick. Let's move on to Michal.
Thank you very much for your sharings. First thing that I thought, as I come from the Middle East, I come from Israel, and so many, I foresee that so many youngsters who went into the war will come back with the same problems that you have come back, and they will not be checked, and they will not be handled as young, and they will be carrying that just as you. So that is the first thought that I had. And I've been feeling very bad about that, because they're 18-year-old, they don't even know their mind. We're talking about free will now, and they just go in to the wars and they think they're going to save their families and their country, and they will come back deeply hurt. not only physically, but also emotionally. And I feel that about all those people that are in wars now, the Houthis, the Ukraine people, the Russian people, all these people who are sending these young children into wars. So that is one thing. The other thing is that I keep holding on to Baba's name, the compassionate one. Because with all the bad things that are happening now all over the world, including the fire, including the Asheville water and fire and wars and governments that are harassing their own citizens, including in our country. Baba was not called by chance compassionate. So yes, I sit here and I don't know what I can do except being compassionate, so that holding in my compassion those people who are suffering, or those people who are in ignorance going to war, those people in Gaza who are mistreated, those children of the Houthis that they're taking into war and brainwashing them to make them grow into beasts. So the only thing that I can do is pray and send love when I do the arati with Baba. But I think that he wants us to be compassionate. So because it's helpless and hopeless, it's so helpless and hopeless, the places that we are with all this that is happening around, that I think that the fact that we are compassionate is very, very important. And that Baba was not called compassionate by chance. And about the 3/4 of the world. So I've been reading Lord Meher second round. It's a beautiful, amazing book. Thank you, Baoji, for doing this. And I got to this point, because in the second time, and always after years, you go into different things, you see different things, Baba is showing you different things. So I was really surprised at seeing this. And so all my attitude about 3/4 of the world has changed from drastically from this. It is on page 2508. Baba is in Angiras mountains. He's doing a seclusion of a few days. And I will read this very short passage. Baba sat in seclusion in his hut from 9 a.m. It's 1945. Okay, Baba didn't talk about 3/4 of the world at that time. He talked about it much, much, much later. Baba sat in seclusion in his hut from 9 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. This proved to be the most severe and most strenuous day of his seclusion so far. When he emerged from the hut, his face was more drawn and weary than Adi had ever seen it. Baba's hair was standing on end, as if he had been electrified. Baba spelled on the board, "A gigantic disaster will overwhelm the world, which will wipe out 3/4 of mankind." Seeing his solemn expression, Adi dared not ask anything. So when I read that, I understood that it's not Baba who is planning this 3/4 of the world. It is Baba who is telling us and preparing us that this is what is going to come, that this is what he foresaw in this seclusion. And he was so shaken by it. It's not something that he did for us to heal the world. It's something that he saw that the world was going into. And he was so shocked by it that his hair was standing up. And you remember that time, he had quite a lot of hair. and long hair. So my whole attitude towards the 3/4 of the world has changed, and I've seen Baba's call come all onto me, to be that call that he knew that this was something that many of us will be facing and seeing, and he wanted us to be in his care, under his name, holding his daman, and being in his love. And I'm not saying that we are not going to go through suffering because of that. But as you say, when we are with Baba, like you said, that you cried out to Baba and he helped you, then he is going, we are going to be fortified by his presence. So that is one more thing that I want to say about free will. It's because Baba is saying, I completely agree with what you said, and so nicely. I heard Erich used to say the free will that we have is the length of the rope that the cow has, which is attached to the tree, which is bound to the tree. So she has a full round of the grass around the tree. But because we are God, Baba says we are God, we can't be God without free will. One of the attributes of God is that you have free will. So of course, because of our humanity and our frailty and our veils, we still have that very limited free will that you said, all 3 limbs free and one tied to the divine will. And so these are the things that I wanted to say. I really appreciate you coming up so bravely to bear your pain and your suffering, and to let us, because when you talked, I understood that you're suffering in all levels of suffering, not only physically, mentally, emotionally, and being abused too, when you go for your rights. So thank you for coming up with that. And we all gathered to hear because we have, we want to know about that more. And thank you very much, and Jai Baba, and love to you. May you be wrapped in Baba's love. And I like what you said about the attitude. Yeah, thank you, Jai Baba.
Yeah, Baba.
Thank you, Miha. Nick,
Yes, ma'am.
you've been here for a long time. Would you like to say any few words to us, or are you ready to say Jai Baba and we go about the day?
Well, I am reminded of I'm lots of stories. Actually, the mandali, this will hold us for another time, but the Erich vow, they kind of trained me to tell stories. I can't sing, I can't dance, but I can tell stories. That's my memories of them. Actually, when some of the mandali would actually ask me to tell stories of other mandali, because I had contact with some of them that the others did not. Like I spent quite a bit of time with Baba's brother Jal in Pune. And there were mandali who did not spend much time with him because Baba kept them separated. After my first trip to India, I was having lunch with Kitty. And Kitty wanted to know about some of the mandali, and I told her about Bao. And Kitty Devi said to me, "Who is Bao?" And I was shocked that she didn't know. But, Kitty had left India right about, I think about the same time that Bao was just coming to Baba in the 50s. And Bao was kept on so busy with writing that Kitty had no real knowledge of him. So that's kind of how these stories have come up, is that they, they would, Kitty would always ask me, tell me something about Val. So here is a rather unique Baba experience with suffering. I presume that most of us have seen by now the original Star Wars, which came out in the 70s, the movie. And there's one scene in there in particular where there is a hologram that's shot from one person out onto the floor, and there's the image, and you can see it's like a movie projector. Anyway, I was at work one day, and I was suffering terrible pain in my neck. And long story short, I ended up going to a massage therapist. And as I was sitting on the table, she's puttering around the room, getting things ready. It's probably 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. There's some ambient light coming through the curtains. It wasn't a black room. And I'm sitting on the edge of the bed, just thinking about this terrible pain in my neck. And before me, I see a hologram. And here is this image that's shooting out of me like a camera projector, a film. And there, 2, 3 feet in front of me, there's an image of a very tiny or slender person wearing essentially rags, crouched down, with arms up guarding the neck and shoulders. And there is a robust person, man. The first one, I couldn't tell if it was male, female, child because of the size. This was obviously a robust man with a long wooden cane, and he is beating this person right in that area where all my pain was. And as this is happening, the person who is being beaten turns around and looks at me, and it's Baba. Baba's being beaten. And the person who is doing the beating turns around and looks at me, and it is me. And here I am with this wooden stick hitting Baba. And as that image is there, the image of that person, that male, female, whatever, the faces are changing. And I am just hitting men, women, children. I'm just bang, bang, bang. And then the person who's doing the beating, who I saw myself clearly as me, then becomes Baba. So something in me, that person, was beating all these people, but it was Baba beating Baba. And I realized how many lifetimes of beatings we've done. How many lifetimes we've been hitting other people, verbally abusing other people. We want to think that everything we're looking for, what the cause is in this one birth. But we carry all this garbage with us. I should say baggage. We carry it with us. So the people that are going through suffering now, for me, I'm paying back dues for suffering that I've caused somebody else. And I think all the suffering in the world when you think of how many, Baba said there were what, 8,400,000 births that we each have to go through. There are so many people that are suffering now who have caused tremendous suffering to other people. That doesn't mean we shouldn't be compassionate, but we also have to understand that there is really no such thing as an innocent bystander in the law of karma. Anyway, Jai Baba dear.
Jai Baba. That's so beautifully said, Nick. Thank you for all of your wonderful comments today. I think I can say that for everybody here. A great thank you. Thank you all for joining in.
Thank you, Nick. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba dear. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
Thank you. It's great.
Jai Baba. Happy Amar Tithi.
Jai Baba.